Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Healthcare World Series session. An early start for those of us in the UK, a much later one for our keynote speaker from San Diego, from whom it's 11 o'clock last night. It's Steve Gardner here from Healthcare World. This morning's session, we're going to be reflecting on an Arab health trip back in January that feels like only yesterday and is actually a couple of months ago, where we heard a huge amount about healthcare developments across the Middle East and across the world, with discussions around healthcare and the Metaverse, the future of healthcare, with some great discussions with old friends and new from across that region, talking about what kind of opportunities there are across the Middle East. We've got some fantastic speakers this morning. We're going to start, though, with a short interview with the event director of Arab Health, Ross Williams. Ross, great to see you this morning, and congratulations on an amazing event.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, we say this every year, but it all comes out well in the end. It was a record-breaking year for us, which I'm very happy to say.
So, I mean, just give us the numbers. How many people were there? What kind of numbers did you have in terms of stands? How did it all come together?
So this year we welcomed over 3,300 exhibitors from, I think, 180 plus countries. We had 63,500 visitors, which I think we were targeting 51,000. So it really showed the demand for healthcare, the demand for updates and to find out what's going on in healthcare in the region and globally, and it just shows what an important meeting space Arab Health is for healthcare. And we welcomed nearly 3,500 conference delegates to the 9 CME accredited conferences that we run alongside the show as well. So like I said, a record-breaking year. We certainly weren't expecting that many visitors, but you guys that were there would have seen walking down aisles and corridors and concourses and stuff in some parts of the show was just pretty much impossible. You couldn't go into a hall that wasn't full. And our new features like the Intelligent Health Pavilion, that was busy throughout the whole 4 days of the exhibition. So I think, what the industry came together, for those 4 days, and it was a huge success for everyone.
Is that the biggest one that you've done?
In regards to size, no, I think we're about 97% of 2020 in regards to square meters. But in regards to visitors, we were over this year.
And what do you think the kind of key takeaways people took from this year's conference were? What were the key themes and things being discussed?
Well, I think if you look at, I think this year was probably a record number of product launches. I know GE, for example, they had a global launch on their stand. They also had another launch, which is, I think it was a launch of the product for the first time kind of in person. They'd spoken about the product, they'd launched it virtually, but they'd actually brought the piece of equipment with them to the show. And I think that really, for me, defines how important Arab Health is now as a global event. I think this was the first global launch that GE have done, and this was my 12th year, as we've mentioned before, but for people to be doing that instead of, say, doing a RSNA, which was 2 months before, they're now having these huge product launches at our event. That shows that the market in the Middle East, it shows how valuable it is, how important it is, and just that business happens in this region and at this show.
Why do you think it was so much busier this year?
I wish we could put our finger on it, to be honest. I think we overachieved what we expected last year. We had a really successful show. 2021 was obviously incredibly difficult, so we've kind of staggered our way back, and we've set ourselves goals and targets and say, okay, we want to be at X% of 2019, 2020, because they are the real benchmarks. But I just think, and this seems to be the way for all exhibitions and trade shows in Dubai at the moment, is that the demand for people to be back to face-to-face. And I know that's a huge regional behavior, I think, face-to-face business. But yeah, being there in person, meeting these people, we had huge involvement from government this year, so people like to see how involved the government are in these kind of shows. You would have seen those. I think behemoth or monsters is probably the only word for those stands that we had in Hall 5, with the Emirates Health, the combination of the Ministry of Health and Prevention, Dubai Health Authority and Department of Health Abu Dhabi. They took a whole hall on their own. And then you had the likes of Pure Health, Emirates Health Services, Dubai Healthcare City. That was like a town almost, like a whole town of healthcare authorities all in one space there, and it was crazy. So I think people being able to see that, being able to see the involvement, being able to see new product launches and new developments and innovations, and kind of interact with some of the things that we had on the show floor as well. Just, it just kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, sorry, but it just shows how important it is for, the region, and for the industry.
Yeah, I mean, we were in that hall with them, so I remember we were dwarfed by the size of those stands. And I suppose it's really, really important, isn't it, that kind of governments, the health authorities, the health systems get behind an event like this.
Yeah, it does, and it's something I think that separates this region from maybe other events globally. You probably wouldn't have that involvement as much. And what these, they do, they announce partnerships, they announce MOUs, their partners that they're working with on specific initiatives, are part of that stand. So, on the Emirates Health stand, for example, you had the three authorities, but you had Dubai and Abu Dhabi doing their own kind of Emirates thing. But then you had the Ministry of Health and Prevention who were operating it on a federal level. So that is, it's really interesting to see that, and how that's evolved over the last few years, and how those guys are going to be pushing that and running that aspect of things in future.
And how are you going to top this for next year? What have you got planned?
It's a good question. Next year, where the demand that we have, we actually rebooked 70% of the show on site this year, which was, again, it was a record for us, which shows what an amazing week all of our exhibitors had. We've got lots of demands for companies to come into the show, to grow, to do new things. So the show will be bigger in 2024. We're already adding new space. We're looking at our conference programs now. They're a huge part of the exhibition. And they complement what we do on the show floor very nicely, and it brings the other side of the audience as well. So it's not just distributors and buyers, it's actually the end users that come on the show floor and interact. We're also looking to increase the size of our Intelligent Health Pavilion, which was a big new feature for us this year, where we built the ICU, the OR and the ED on the show floor, and you could have like an audio tour of those rooms to find out use cases of the products, what they do. And it was a whole kind of patient workflow. So we're going to be doubling the size of that next year. Hopefully we can bring some more, interactive rooms onto the show floor, get some more companies involved. But, I've, funnily enough, been looking at the data this morning of the people that attended that. And, there's some really high level people that came to that. There was lots of ministerial delegations, lots of people from Saudi and all over the Middle East, plus a huge some big buyers in there, plus big hospital groups, so it's been really important for us. And it was completely new, so it was almost like a finger in the air and, let's see how this goes. But as it turns out, it was a massive success, so we're looking to build on that for next year.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen it, and for those watching, have a look on my LinkedIn feed, because we published yesterday the Healthcare World Report and review of Arab Health, and Sarah Cartledge, our editor, wrote a fantastic piece actually with some great pictures from the Intelligent Health Pavilion, looking at some of the things that were going. Live surgery. Not sure I entirely fancy that at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, but nonetheless. So what sort of themes did you cover in the conference this year?
The conferences, so we had 9 CME accredited conferences, like I said. We have our big standouts, the Total Radiology Conference, surgery, obs gynae, that all run alongside the show. So it's really what's the latest developments and trends within those particular specialities. just under 3,500 people attended, and it's really nice to have those conferences and then have things like the Intelligent Health Pavilion where you can talk about a new product, a new trend within a certain specialty, and then kind of go and see it and interact with it in the Intelligent Health Pavilion, and then also go and see the manufacturer of that product as well. So everything that we do kind of ties in nicely. And like, as I said before, the conferences really differentiate us as a trade show, because you have that end user and buyer experience. So it's a nice kind of add-on for us to have those conferences and all those topics.
So in terms of actually kind of, because I know that as the show gets bigger, demand for floor space gets more and more. What's the sort of your advice to people that are looking to try and get a stand for next year? Do they need to get in particularly early? I mean, do they need to be talking about this already?
Yeah, they do. As I said, we're 70% plus sold out now of floor space. We are adding more, so there's more opportunity to exhibit, but the longer you leave it, the more difficult it's going to be ultimately. So if you are looking to participate next year, then please do drop us a line and we can help you out immediately.
So I hope you've got a nice spot for Healthcare World ready for next year, have you?
I'm working on it, as always, that.
Great stuff, Ross. Thanks so much for that. I guess one final thought before we move on to our keynote speaker, Daniel Kraft. Of course, Daniel was part of a very new element to Arab Health, the Future Health event. How did that come together, and what were your sort of thoughts about the way that worked?
It's something that we launched in 2022. Again, something that we've been discussing with the Ministry of Health and Prevention for a few years on how we get a healthcare leadership event together. We have all of these people on the show floor and we only have them together for a few days in the same city at the same time. How do we kind of force them together and start having more high level discussions around policy and the future of healthcare? We launched it in 2022 because of Expo. So we would have had more ministers in town, more kind of healthcare delegations who were taking advantage of both of those opportunities. And this year, it was nice last year. It was more of a kind of gala dinner / networking function. What we did this year was made it a lot more interactive. So we had the likes of Daniel and some really high level speakers, but then we tried to focus a lot more on networking as well, so you could actually have the discussion instead of sitting down and having a dinner and listening to someone speak. We had all of those things and made a lot more of the networking. So it's something that we're looking to grow continually. And I think the venue, unfortunately I didn't get to go because I was too busy running around the exhibition floor, but I think having it at the Museum of the Future in Dubai and talking about the future of healthcare, and it all just tied in really nicely. And that's something we wanted to do to differentiate this as yes, it's Arab Health and it's an event alongside Arab Health, but it's also a completely new thing. So to have it away from the exhibition but close enough was a really nice factor for us this year.
No, and I thought it worked really well. I was lucky enough to go. You missed out. It was a really, really good event. Really enjoyed it. Thanks very much, Ross, for your time this morning. Talking of the Future Health event that took place at the Museum of the Future, we're very lucky to have with us this morning one of the keynote speakers from that event, Dr. Daniel Kraft, joining us from the past in a weird kind of a way, being as to how it's yesterday in San Diego, Daniel, where you're sitting, isn't it?
I'm in Silicon Valley, not in San Diego, right by Stanford University, in Menlo Park.
Right, okay, jolly good. But it is yesterday. You're still the day before the rest of us. Is that right?
I'm right here, right now. Yes, it's still here.
Well, look, Daniel, let me hand over to you. I think you're going to do a sort of quick 10 minutes for us, just summarising and giving us some ideas about what the metaverse is and how it works, and then hopefully take some questions after that. For those of you watching on the Healthcare World website, you have the big red button that will allow you to send us a question for Daniel. Please feel free to do so. But Daniel, you should be able to it should be set up for you to share screen and share your slides. So take it away.
Sure. Well, thanks, Steve, for having me. I thought instead of just doing a 30-minute interview, I'd spend 10 minutes sort of maybe crystallizing a little bit of what I talked about a month or so ago at the Museum of the Future. Let's see if I can get my screen to share. So let me know if you can see my slides. So,
yeah.
It was great to be back in Dubai. I've been there several times. I think the first time I was there was when I was a medical student back in the in the 90s. It's certainly changed a lot. It was great to be back in the Museum of the Future. I've been there one other time. We spent some time there in that talk, kind of looking at that whole session, the future of the metaverse. And I think everyone's now well aware of, ChatGPT, now 3, now 4, things like DALL-E that are becoming sort of co-pilots to care and have huge implications. And just last week, ChatGPT 4 was launched, and I was with some of the team from Microsoft while I was in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and more recently, and it's going to be a game changer across healthcare. It already can pass. I think now the new version could do, instead of 65% of passing assessments, it can do about 95% passing on the US medical board. So things are moving quickly. I think part of this new world of metaverse or mediverse will be generative health, where we can create environments and instructions and patient communications on the fly and match the individual or the age, cultural language. I think it's the beginning of a very exciting age with lots of pluses and minuses. And so watch the space. It's going to really evolve very quickly. And so when we think of the metaverse, I think a lot of us think about the traditional VR and AR, which is moving quickly. But I think about how we can kind of now connect the dots in this sort of new digital intelligence, more data-driven, and hopefully more crowdsourced era, where we can sort of combine our global knowledge for care anywhere. And of course, thematically, health is wealth. And we know that healthcare is built upon not any one technology, but by the interface and convergence of often many accelerating technologies. And I think it's going to help us move from sort of, the one size fits all universe to this sort of now meta or mediverse, where we can connect the dots in new empowering ways. And a lot of that is that convergence of VR, AR, Web3, new forms of connectivity, and beyond, which I'll touch on briefly. But briefly, I think we often in healthcare get very siloed in technologies and clinical fields. And the opportunity now is to sort of to overlap them and put things together to solve things in new ways. And leverage many of the new technologies that exist today that didn't 20 years ago when I was a Stanford medical student, from computational biology to robotic surgery to digital therapeutics to new forms of gene therapy, et cetera. It's a really exciting time to rethink and reimagine healthcare, not just for now, but what's going to happen in the next decade. And not just thinking about the sick care model, where most of us on the traditional medicine side have lived, but even about precision wellness and optimizing not just lifespan, but health span. So a lot of potential to move the needle and to go from where we are sort of now, intermittent, reactive, one size fits all sick care, to a future that's much more health focused, much more self-care, much more virtualized and sometimes metaverse enabled, but also enhanced with new forms of AI, machine learning, and hopefully aligned with incentives, workflow, and culture. We're still, though, in 2023, at least in the US where I based, the fax machine era, down the street at Stanford, where I trained at Harvard. Fax machines are still common, paper forms, communicating on DVD-ROM, CD-ROMs, and I don't even own a CD-ROM player anymore. We still are back to waiting rooms, even after telehealth exploded during the pandemic. And we're still often thinking about healthcare in old-fashioned silos, sort of that universe, not the metaverse. And I think this new future, which is going to be enabled by the metaverse, is more integrated biomedical knowledge that doesn't take 17 years from publication to become something useful at the bedside or website. And COVID has been a bit of a catalyst. We saw that things that often would take 10 years could happen in 10 weeks. So from incremental to exponential. And my favorite quote from the former head of DARPA is that just like Sputnik set off the space age, COVID is sparking a bit of a new health age, and we need to keep some of that momentum up as we go into this new era. And if we look 10 years forward, not to have a failure of imagination. There's this fun quote from Bill Gates: most people tend to overestimate what they could do in 1 year and underestimate what they could do in 10 years. And I think the next 10 years, even the next 1 or 2 years, will make the last decade look slow. And of course, healthcare needs to move a little more slowly than some other fields. So we need to have some guardrails, but it's an exciting time. So I've been looking at this sort of convergence of future for a while. I've been the chair of medicine at something called Singularity University. I've run a program called Exponential Medicine, which we just rebranded and relaunched as Next Med Health. We just had it last week in San Diego. I'm just still recovering from 4 days there with about 400 people from 30 plus countries looking at the future from all sorts of different angles, from psychedelics to chatbots to drones to AI. And part of the theme there and now is, of course, that it's not just all these new forms of data, but how we match them up together: genomics, proteome, exposome, sociome, microbiome. that's giving us this new era of what's often called the digital twin, the ability to layer all this information together and make it useful for both optimization of health, prediction, diagnostics, therapy, public and global health. And I'm an oncologist. I think it's going to be particularly applicable to personalized oncology, both prevention, diagnostics, and therapy. And so we need to keep in mind when we look at this metaverse that it's still a little bit clunky, but you need to remember that things are moving in this exponential manner. Moore's law is the classic example, and Moore's law is not petering out. We're moving into quantum computing, which is already starting to have some potential in drug discovery and making sense of all the new biomarkers and that we can now leverage and measure. And so as things move on this exponential, our phones are going to start dissolving theoretically this year into our AR guided glasses from Apple and others, or dissolve into our contact lenses. We've seen the evolution of diagnostics. 10 years ago, basic EKG on your phone. Now you can put it on a credit card and have it analyzed by AI. Blood pressure and blood sugar is coming to our wristwatches and patches probably in the next year or so. I have a demo device on my wrist that does real-time blood pressure, and another company that claims to be able to do blood sugar on my other wrist. We don't need to wear anything. We're in the era of invisibles. The camera on your phone or laptop now can diagnose vitals in about 10 or 20 seconds. So we can start to really collect information and now make it useful to almost anybody and translate that knowledge using ChatGPT and beyond. And the cameras on our phones as well can be diagnostic devices. This is a company out of Israel I'm on the board of called Healthy.io. Instead of bringing your ear into the lab, you just dip it and take a picture with your smartphone, and you have the answer about your urinalysis right away. So that's just an example of some of the things that are on the exponential and already gone through the FDA and cleared. We also have the era of not just digital biomarkers, but acoustic epidemiology. The sound of your voice, I can tell I have a cold. You can tell whether that's croup or cold or COVID, or if I have other neurologic diseases. And the world of wearables, which is started very consumer-centric, like the Fitbit, is moving on to the medical side. And there's many examples now where wearables and otherables can measure almost every element of our physiology and behavior, from wearable patches and now ultrasound devices to censored socks to help track the health of a diabetic patient, to underwearables. These Internet of Medical things are so cheap, you can put them in 10 pairs of underwear and always be censored as long as you're wearing your underwear. Ringables, of course, Oura Ring is one example, consumer grade, but can already tell a lot, of course, about your sleep, but also can tell and predict pregnancy 5 days before a pregnancy test, or understand how you respond to a COVID booster. There's now patches that BioIntelliSense is a great example that can stream an intensive care unit level of data. We still have the challenge of how do we make sense of that data, who owns that information, and how do we even take small data when you send a patient home from a hospital visit. Are they walking better, or walking more after a hip replacement, or walking less? So we can use this small data in new ways. Another era that's moving quickly is that of course, imaging, diagnostic imaging or predictive imaging, whether it's your brain or your body. We're now leveraging these into new ways of predicting everything from Alzheimer's to cancers. I just had a Pronuvo scan done just 2 weeks ago in about 60 minutes, full body MRI enhanced with AI radiology. It gave me pretty good deep insights into my health, and I can communicate that to my primary care doctor as well. And I think in the next decade, we'll see the ability to go to your corner pharmacy and have your whole body scanned at low price. We're already seeing very low cost scanners come to market in the last year or two. Even wearable versions like Open Water that can diagnose strokes, hemorrhages, and even not just measure the brain, but also provide therapeutic energy to treat certain neurologic diseases. So big picture in this new metaverse, the diagnostic tool set is moving from our hospital to home to our pocket. A whole new set of tools that can enable anybody to listen to a heart and diagnose a murmur, or to now use AI-enhanced ultrasound devices to democratize diagnostics almost anywhere on the planet, including clinics across rural Africa. And of course, now this can be blended with AI or IA, intelligence augmentation, to give us the ability to, not necessarily replace the radiologist, but when there's no radiologist, they can do a pretty good job of doing initial readings, whether it's radiology, pathology, dermatology, or even gastroenterology can be enhanced as well. So a lot of interesting applications of AI, of course. The challenge is how to integrate that with the human side. It's not going to replace your doctor, but it's going to augment, and those who are using AI will replace those who don't. So it's an interesting time for shifting and change. A big element, of course, that's entering the metaverse is digital health, the ability now to take all this data and make it really useful for the individual, the clinician, the healthcare system, all the way to the era of prescribing digital apps and therapeutics as opposed to drugs and devices. Everything from tracking your meds to smoking cessation to mental health are all becoming digital. There's now 250,000 plus digital health related solutions. Some of them are FDA cleared, like digital therapeutics to treat ADHD with a video game as opposed to a medication. And these are now blending with the empowering the patient. Each of us now can take our quantified data and make it more useful, but increasingly our quantified connected data from our wearables and otherwise are going to shift to our metaverse-based clinicians to optimize wellness, to diagnose disease early, and then to treat disease in a much more personalized and intelligent way. And of course, now that we all have these connecting through our smartphones, we can start to crowdsource that knowledge. Project Baseline from Verily or the All of Us trial from the NIH is enabling thousands of people to share their data, their digital exhaust, their genomics, so we can make sense of that and sort of in a summary, create kind of predictalytics, a bit of a FICO score for every individual or individual patient, so that we can have a bit of an early warning, like a check engine light for the body before someone blows a gasket. So lots of opportunity there, as has been published by Mike Snyder and others at Stanford, just to use a wearable to predict who has COVID, sometimes 2 or 3 days before the COVID test will go positive. And so in our metaverse era, we're going to almost enter this era of the minority report, predicting diseases before we even know we have them. One challenge is making sense of this new universe of technologies. So I've recently launched a platform called digital.health. That's the website. You can go to digital.health. We just launched it and search for solutions. It might be around diagnostics, and you can look up AliveCore. I happen to be wearing their sweater. I don't work for them or have any real affiliation, but it's a good example of a digital tool with lots of validation that can be leveraged for tracking cardiac problems, for example, or a whole bunch of solutions around hypertension. So check out digital.health as a good resource to find what's already there, let alone what's coming next. Finally, the challenge, of course, with all these new forms of tools and technologies is to integrate them into the workflow of the already overwhelmed physician, nurse, pharmacist. No clinician wants more data. We want the actionable information. So there's an opportunity now to not just prescribe digital solutions, but connect the dots in the virtual and the physical space. And to make that, again, part of the workflow of the clinician to help technology get out of the way. There was a story yesterday about ChatGPT-4 coming out of Microsoft that will now just listen to the patient-doctor interaction and write the note for them, so we don't have to spend so much time charting on our horrible EMR systems. So I think part of this future will be increasingly crowdsourced, just like we crowdsource our driving. We can almost imagine a real-time Google Maps or Waze for healthcare, where almost everybody has the opportunity when they want to not just be an organ or blood donor, but a data donor as well. And that empowers each of us to be part of the solution. I think COVID saw a big acceleration in virtualizing trials, and also, of course, in telemedicine. I think the future of care is going to shift from our usual intermittent episodic once-a-year checkup, where data is collected, a fraction of the time, and leads to our reactive mindset when we tend to wait for the heart attack, the stroke, the cancer, to a future that's much more continuous, with much more proactive information that is happening anytime, anywhere, at much lower cost, and democratizes healthcare across the world. And so increasingly, we're going to go from hospital to home, from hospital to hospital, and a lot of changes in care are going to be quite disruptive to current elements. Of course, virtual visits and telemedicine is already here. Chatbots are getting better and better at knowing you. They'll have your entire medical history. They'll be leveraging wearable data and beyond. And of course, that brings us to this era of the metaverse. Some of it will be how we interact with our care teams, not just, of course, on a screen, but feeling like they're there. Or platforms like this one, when you'll go to visit a virtual environment called AI Metis, which was highlighted at Arab Health. Or your doctor will show up as an avatar. I got turned into an avatar when I was in New York and San Francisco, in LA recently. The challenge, of course, is how do we learn as clinicians to interact and have good bedside manner, but also good website manner? The whole future of medical education needs to be looked at going forward. And part of the metaverse is medical education. Instead of see one, do one, teach one, we can now simulate and learn in virtual environments and practice, not on patients, but in virtual elements, just like a pilot would practice on a flight simulator. And to bring this all together now, a lot of the global ecosystems opening up. Starlink is soon provide internet access to almost 50% of the globe that doesn't have access. So we now have this new internet of medical things that can be applied almost anywhere, creating massive amounts of data that's often siloed. And our opportunity in the new metaverse is to not just have data, but actionable information, and narrow the gap between information and what's useful for the clinician, for the patient, for hospital systems, and beyond. So I'm excited about this new sort of metaverse age, or new health age. It's not about any one technology. It's not about VR, AR, XR, but how we connect the dots and think about what's possible in the next couple of years to solve for what we need to solve for. Again, sometimes it's not about the new technology, but escaping from old ideas and mindsets. That's often sometimes the highest and hardest problem in healthcare. But I think it's an incredible time to be thinking about where we might go next. And I think if we take that sort of new exponential mindset and collaborative mindset, we can kind of go from where we've been. Again, very intermittent, episodic, one size fits all, sick care to a new future that's metaverse enabled, intelligence crowdsourced, and aligned with incentive models. So it's time to not predict the future, but build it boldly together. So there's a short summary of some of what I talked about at the Museum of the Future. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. That an incredible insight, and it does. I mean, it sparks a whole bunch of questions in my mind. I mean, firstly, thank you so much for doing that. You're clearly still suffering a little bit with a cold there, soldiering on through it. But let me just kind of focus on a few elements of that I think are particularly interesting. The one that fascinates me is that you're talking about a whole bunch of different technologies. You're talking about a whole bunch of opportunities to gain insight from data, to use different diagnostic tools to kind of fuel the thinking and fuel the diagnosis and the treatment of a patient. How do you actually solve the problem of getting all this stuff to talk to each other? Because at the end of the day, you've got lots and lots of different solutions. If they don't talk to each other and they're not coming into a common data platform, it all becomes disparate.
Yeah, we still have huge challenges with interoperability. I think the HIMSS conference has been based on that and will be based onto it, hopefully not for too much longer. We are seeing now, the FHIR type platforms to make data more interoperable. Patients are starting to demand to have their own information. Some new regulations in the US at least passed where you can now access your medical information more easily and have more true portability. We're still limited by old regulations like HIPAA that were built pre-digital and are now often hindering care and the ability to share information and share knowledge. GDPR and others are also somewhat in the way. So we need to, oil the ability to have data be the new oil and allow it to be free in certain forms, but still be careful about connecting the dots in smart ways. And there's now synthetic data and a whole new set of companies trying to make data accessible, but still keep it anonymized. So huge problem to connect the dots. And there's often, again, many misaligned incentives. Hospital systems or EMRs don't want to share. Some countries like UK with NHS or Clalit in Israel have the ability to, even in the UAE, interconnect the data in much more synthesized, useful ways.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the advantages of having a whole nation system like the NHS is the fact that you are actually able to share data across the system. Whereas I imagine that in the US, where it's individual providers, is that more of a challenge?
Well, we have thousands of often broken systems here in the US. As you might know, we spend more per capita in the US, but we're way down the list on outcomes. We might have some of the great technology, but it's still not all super connected. A lot of that is, even in COVID, we saw that a lot of the data still to be faxed to the CDC. It's just ridiculous old school systems. And some countries are leapfrogging, in the Arab market, in Singapore, in Asia, and Africa. You don't have some of the old guard in the lobbies trying to protect the old models.
I suppose it's interesting you mentioned HIPAA and GDPR. It's quite interesting the way in which privacy laws are almost a kind of well-meaning but muddle-headed when it comes to healthcare data, because actually they stop us from actually sharing the kind of data between clinicians that we need. I mean, is that an issue about getting individuals to understand how their data is being used, and so it becomes a consent issue?
I think if we go back to that model I briefly mentioned of Google Maps and Waze, we can hardly imagine driving now without using Google Maps or Waze, certainly in certain cities. And you don't want the data from New York when you're driving in San Francisco. And we're all data donors. We donate to that map, whether we kind of realize it or not. We're getting information back that's hyper local. And I think, I've seen as a clinician patients who couldn't get their medical records sent in time because they hadn't signed off some forms. So they died with their privacy intact. They would much rather be alive with their privacy not intact, or to know that their information could help others with similar diseases. I'm a pediatric oncologist. Almost every pediatric cancer patient is part of a clinical trial. That's been a big game changer, both in pediatric oncology, but has now driven a lot of adult oncology. And I think if we understand that most people are not trying to get your potassium or your lithium level, that we can connect the dots and build a much more real-time map, because this new emerging metaverse driven by GPT and beyond is going to be able to synthesize that in really incredible ways. And we're going to want the data to be actual, because it's often as good as the data you have.
I think it's part of a broader problem as well. I mean, on the one hand, we're talking about people understanding that their data is being used, how that data is being used, consenting to their data being used. But then there's also this problem about, the metaverse and the speed of change, the speed of the adoption of new technology. How easy is it to bring the patient with us? At the end of the day, particularly, I think the older generation are used to that idea of I go into a doctor's surgery, I sit down with my doctor, and my doctor tells me what's wrong with me. How easy is it going to be, and how are we going to go about bringing patients on this journey?
Well, I think, like we always talk about precision medicine, personalized medicine. Now we have these new tools to really make health and care and self-care much more personal. It can be in the right language with the right tonality. I was just playing with the new ChatGPT 4 model. You can say, write instructions for my Hispanic 78-year-old patient with an 8th grade reading level about why it's important to take their blood pressure medicines. Or that can become in a visual that is useful, or the right voice or tonality or chatbot or avatar that will be in almost everyone's pocket. I mean, the bottom billion all have SMS phones. Soon they'll have the equivalent of our Apple iPhone 11s or 12s. And that can really democratize healthcare and give everybody almost that kind of Jarvis, from that's very tuned to them, and help them be much more proactive. We spend most of our healthcare dollar on the diseases that often can be prevented by smarter guidance and simple things like better nutrition and public health measures, individualized empowerment and early knowledge. So I think there's huge potential to shift things to the proactive preventative side using these new tools, and the metaverse and our personal healthcare metaverse will be part of that.
So on the one hand, you've got you think about the challenges and the barriers to getting to, the sort of position that we want to get to as the patient, and bringing the patient with them understanding the use of technology, them understanding how it can benefit us. Of course, the other benefit is you guys, is the clinicians. I mean, how easy is it to get clinicians to spend the time to understand, to get involved in using this stuff and actually embracing it properly?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest barriers, at least in the US. I mean, almost every hospital wants to do a pilot with your new digital health solution, whether it's a VR headset to treat pain, or a new training module, or an app or a wearable. So it's often quite siloed. Many clinicians don't want their cheese moved. Like, there's now the ability to do a virtual angiogram, like platforms like Clearly and HeartFlow with a quick CT scan can replace the interventional diagnostic catheter for looking at your coronary arteries. The cardiologist may not be so happy with that change. And so there's often a lot of misalignments, including with culture and reimbursement and workflow. So just because you can have a new solution or tool or an AI engine doesn't mean that the clinician, the nurse, the patient, the pharmacist are going to trust it. So there's a lot of evolution that's going to need to occur. And again, it all comes down to following the money. Who pays for it, and how does it get integrated? I was quite impressed, having been to UAE and Dubai and Abu Dhabi several times, that the mindset is there to kind of bring this future a little bit faster and smarter than we can here, at least in California.
And a great example being you showed during the slide deck there the example of smart radiology. At the end of the day, I think if I remember from the slide, it's sort of 91% success rate from AI guided radiology, as opposed to a radiologist looking at a scan. And radiologists, of course, are probably one of the first sort of professions that are being put out of a job, ostensibly by technology.
Well, that's, there's that quote, your radiologist, your doctor, your nurse isn't going to be replaced by AI, but those who use AI replace those who don't. And there's already a huge shortage of radiologists. The best results come when you combine the radiologist and the AI, the cobot, as it were. And that data is probably already out of date. That's a year or two old. I'm sure now it's 98% of it, but that can be used for the usual screening. You can get the result right away. You're not waiting to get the neuroradiologist up at 2 a.m. You at least get the initial scheme. So I think we're going to see evolution of the roles of radiology, pathology, primary care doctors, specialists. It's going to really up-level the community health worker in rural Rwanda to be able to do what a primary care doctor can do, or have the tools of a specialist in their pocket. So I think it's an exciting era to democratize healthcare, and in more developed worlds to kind of empower the patient as well, and educate and up-level everybody to play a role in health, including, preventing the next pandemic.
And you talk there about a shortage of radiologists. we're talking globally about this idea that we're going to be sort of 30 million healthcare workers short by 2030. Can the kind of technology that you're talking about mitigate that problem? And more to the point, it probably can, but to what level? Can we solve that problem with technology?
Well, you still need the human hand. I mean, there's a huge shortage of, let's say, surgeons in many parts of the world. You can now leverage VR in the metaverse, as my friend Shafi Ahmed, who is at Arab Health as well, to train surgeons. They can go in a VR headset and crowdsource and learn surgeries anywhere, but you still need to train them and have an operating room. I've been involved with XPRIZE for many years. We developed an XPRIZE for rapid COVID testing, and we're evolving a new XPRIZE for maybe the future of the automated robotic surgery that won't start with a full-on autonomy, but might be an automated suite where the surgeon might be across the planet, or eventually the surgery becomes more automated per se. There's a huge shortage of health workers. I mean, nursing is a big shortage in many parts. Could you have the equivalent of Big Hero 6 from Disney, kind of the smart robot that can help with certain elements of care? And now there are humanoid robots, some even being built by Tesla and others. When you add on not just the avatar element, but the AGI, we'll see pretty, and the robot can talk to you with ChatGPT equivalents. There's a lot of potential there to meet some unmet needs.
Well, audience question here from a chap called Ahmed Khalil. He wants to know how we can empower patients to own their data, manage sharing, and educate them on the power of data. So moving from data to information analysis, education and empowerment. So how can we empower patients to own their own data?
Well, you can already do it today. I mean, if you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit and you connect it into HealthKit or a Common Health on Android, you can now look at your longitudinal data. I think part of our future of a clinical exam will be just looking at your heart rate and how it changes when you sleep. And you can now go on an Apple Watch and a couple apps that can, on top of it, and look at your own data and see how it changes. I did 100 days of VR workouts in the metaverse early in the pandemic when we were locked down, the gyms were closed, and I could show that my resting heart rate went down by like 10 points over 3 months as an example. So there's already ways to get involved with your own data in that way. The challenge is often, again, your doctor doesn't want it. So part of the role of you as an empowered patient is to own your data, start to share it with your clinician, your healthcare system, so they can start to use that in this new connected world, and that will still advance the future faster.
I've seen technology where people can actually have their own medical records, their healthcare data on their phone, rather than it being owned by a health system. Is that the direction that we're going to go in? Because at the moment, your doctor is the arbiter, is the guardian of your healthcare data. Should it be in your possession, on your phone, on your device?
Well, I think it most likely will live in the cloud, because that's going to be terabytes of data soon. Your genome, your metabolome, your sociome, your microbiome, your metabolomics, all are going to get really, really interesting, and it's going to be analyzed and sifted through real time. So you're getting a little ping saying, "Hey, Daniel, your vitals look a little off. Maybe you need to get a scan, or go visit your MD, or go to the corner pharmacy and get that full body MRI that might be available soon." So I think we should be able to own our data, share it as we like, but we'll have it continually sifted and looked at. And again, as we crowdsource that, we'll have massive new insights about health and disease and what can optimize health span and pick up problems early.
So my next trip now, I imagine you're probably going to be floating around the same thing at Hinchins in Chicago in about a month or so's time. And the session that I'm running there is comparing different global health systems. So US model, UK model, some of the models in the Middle East, Africa, Europe. Thinking about that as I'm kind of preparing myself for that and listening to what you're saying, what I wonder is, how can individual health systems, what needs to be done at a system level to enable the use of the kind of levels of technology that you've been talking about?
I think it's got to become more of a platform play. My friend John Halamka, now at Mayo, who used to be at Harvard, is building this Mayo platform where you can start to integrate these solutions at scale. So the idea of not having fragmented elements with a different app and wearable and solution or AI for this or that, but kind of combining it so it integrates across the care continuum is one example. Another, of course, is figuring out how to align incentives. The hospital CEO wants the beds full, the insurance company wants the beds empty, and not to admit anybody, or to now more admit them patients to the hospital at home, which is getting more and more powerful. So I think we need to cross-fertilize all these. A lot of it is about design thinking, and a lot of healthcare systems are still thinking about technology stacks from 2010 and aren't really building into this new exponential age. They're not really future-proofing enough, not thinking about What are we going to do with the $10 genome, with quantum computing, with Internet of Medical Things, with VR and virtual reality, next level telemedicine, the ability to gamify, the ability to use drones for delivery. I mean, these things are in fragments, and we're going to see some great lessons. Sometimes it comes from places like China with Good Doctor, where they have like 300 million Chinese now getting virtual care who had almost no care. So I don't think there's any one system that's got it nailed down that we can cross-fertilize from each other.
It's how you kind of facilitate and where within a healthcare system this stuff is going to fit, who's going to use it, etc., etc. What do you think the timescales are around this? I mean, at what point are we going to start to see all of the things that you talked about, all those multitudes of technologies actually being part of our everyday life?
Well, a lot of them are, again, there's that famous quote, "The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed," from William Gibson. And you're seeing pockets of this in different places. You're going to see some, concierge practices in New York trying to build these complex stacks. The One Medicals, now acquired by Amazon, can now start to do pretty interesting analytics and same-day delivery, whether it's a diagnostic or a drug. So that's some of the sort of super connected future. I think what I saw demoed last week from Microsoft with their Prometheus program, essentially ChatGPT on steroids, is going to be a huge game changer. The ability that you can just take a picture of a lab report and it will translate it to the patient in the age and language and culture that they'd understand it, or really start to enable a clinician to not miss a differential diagnosis or find medical errors before they happen. So I think things will accelerate. The challenge will be regulatory and reimbursement, and regulatory is often lagging and reimbursement is often fear-based and not necessarily aligned with accelerating the future. The FDA has done a pretty good job of doing software as a medical device and the PreCheck platform to kind of accelerate some of these new digital twin and AI-based models, but that needs to cross over to Europe and the rest of the world and harmonize a bit.
And this might be a good point at which to bring in some of our other panelists. So thanks for that, Daniel. Please hang around. I think we'll have some more questions for you. But we've also got with us this morning Christina Sahatsky from Altamimi, Phil Anderton from ADHD 360, who was at First Arab Health this year, Waleed Hassali from Humour, who I think will probably have a little bit to say and a little bit to add to that discussion and debate around the metaverse. Mansour Ahmed from Colliers, Middle East consultant and Middle East expert, and of course Ross, who we heard from earlier from Informa from Arab Health. Christina, I think actually Daniel was just talking about regulation and regulation around kind of the development of metaverse. And I think you, as the lawyer in the room, I'd imagine you've probably got a little bit to say about that. What are your thoughts on the future of healthcare and how this new world can be regulated?
Well, certainly that's the 64, I guess, adjusted for inflation, $64 million question or more. But what we are seeing is more and more questions in the region to this effect, especially as we just heard also about Arab Health, where this was at the forefront of a lot of the conversations. But what we have in the region, particularly in the UAE and Saudi, kind of at the core of it are regulations concerning data protection, data privacy, cybersecurity, and they take a very conservative approach here. And so fundamentally, you get into the question of where is the data? If it's in the metaverse, where is it being stored? Is the fact that it's being accessed by healthcare providers or people or AI tools from outside the region, is that going to be considered a violation of the law? It starts to get not so straightforward, just in the way the metaverse is coming together. And I think that's one of the biggest questions at the forefront that the regulators need to address. Now, we have seen such things as the Saudi Food and Drug Authority putting in recent guidance on AI and machine learning in medical devices. Doesn't answer all the questions, but it's a great step forward. It's starting to see that the regulations in the region are trying to adapt for innovation. You look at the transformation of the healthcare sector here in Saudi, and the whole idea is moving to scrapping the old healthcare system, moving to the new one that can be more adaptive to innovation. But with any good advances, the regulations will always lag innovation, right? This is ultimately where we want to be. It would be we wouldn't be doing good with innovation if the regulations are already predicting everything we could think of. And so what we're seeing is just a balancing of the risks, a lot more conversations directly with the regulators. Like we saw, the regulators, executives were at Arab Health. Unfortunately, we're seeing these high-level conversations occurring to say, how can we be adaptive? And fundamentally, we do see the regulators being quite interested in how these tools can help them achieve their healthcare sector transformation goals, better adopt these patient-centered new models of care that are being rolled out here. But unfortunately, we don't have a complete 100% secure legal answer. And so it becomes down to looking at best practices, trying to stay, what is the intention of the regulations, and trying to stay on that side of implementing it. I mean, you just look at Metaverse, the whole concept, right, is not actually new. We saw it, even in some sci-fi books in the 1990s. We've seen tons of movies about this, as was referenced earlier. So the concept is not new. As Daniel was saying, it's being already used in some places. And so, where was I going with that? The point being that, yes, the conversations, I think, need to be had with the regulators to push them forward. But ultimately, as we roll this out, there will be questions. Oh, that was what I was going to say. You remember when some of us will remember when the credit card started being used. Everyone was really afraid of the credit card. They were really afraid of, will everybody start using this? Who's not going to want to use cash? The data and security around all that information that's being captured by a credit card. Now here we are, and we wouldn't even think of walking out the door with cash. We have nothing but credit cards sometimes in our wallet. So of course, there'll be lots of concerns up front, but I think if you're too stuck with the concerns, you're going to be left behind. As Daniel was saying, it's those who are adopting it who are going to move forward here.
It's interesting you mentioned the credit card example. I had one colleague at Arab Health who left his wallet on the plane as he arrived in Dubai, and managed to do the entire week just using Apple Pay on his phone. If that's not an example of moving forward with technology, I don't know what is. Waleed, I want to come to you. Obviously, Humour, you've been looking to implement your system across the Middle East. Have you had any issues? Have you fallen foul of any of the kind of regulatory laws around data, or are you managing to negotiate those choppy waters reasonably sensibly?
Thank you. Yeah, it hasn't been very difficult, because before coming and during the first few months of operating in the Middle East, we have done our homework and we have worked on understanding the data privacy, the information security, governance, and so we set up in compliance with all of the regulatory frameworks, both in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. The difficulty is not in understanding the laws and complying with them, but more the educational process that you need to go through with the stakeholders that you want to work with in the region. Saudi Arabia in particular is undergoing a huge transformation, and as part of the transformation, you see things are still kind of moving around, the mandates, the governance, the budgets. So they understand where they're going. They have a great vision that they're trying to implement, but executing is not always easy, and you need to accompany them. There are lots of experiences that we bring from other parts of the world, experiences that are positive, but also mistakes that have been done, that we can share with our stakeholders or our partners in the region to help them navigate and implement quicker, more efficiently, and more successfully. So it has been an interesting year or so in the region, and we have succeeded in landing one project in the Eastern Cluster. We're launching this with diabetes type 2 kind of remote patient monitoring with one of the diabetes centers, and we're very proud that we will be able to show the outcomes of using digital health in supporting patients with certain chronic disease. And so we're trailblazing. I think the first success is going to open the doors to many others.
I guess, Daniel, that's an example. We'll leave getting one technology embedded in Saudi Arabia. Is it a question of that kind of getting one in, and then it opens the floodgates, and all of those different technologies that you started to talk about start to follow?
I think when many patients and clinicians get a taste of using an app or a platform that's impactful and is easy, and often gives them insights that change the trajectory of their day-to-day experience as a diabetic or otherwise, it kind of opens up the art of the possible. Just like with COVID, we all got now used to home diagnostic tests, and that'll expand to the common flu and RSV and other things. When we had our first versions of telehealth or using a chatbot, Hume is a great platform. I've seen it evolve over the years, and I think they're now sort of reaching the point where they can really engage the individual, and now the data is showing how useful they can be.
Mansoor, I want to come to you. You're always a great source of wisdom when it comes to understanding need and requirement in the Middle East region. What are the kind of particular technological areas and areas of kind of metaverse development that you think are required in the Middle East region?
So yes, I think we are doing a lot of work. On average, just to tell you that we do around 30 to 50 new hospitals, feasibilities or evaluation that whether they can be built in the region or not, and around 10 to 15 existing hospital, they're restructuring and upgrade. So as Christina has said, as soon as, or as long as the regulatory and confidentiality issues are resolved, I see 4 or 5 places where already people are asking us to see, when we are basically working on design or establishing of a new hospital or restructuring of the old hospital. I mean, if you look about the old hospital, we are working one of the oldest in the world, probably Qasr Al-Aini in Egypt, which is 300-year-old. And the last, upgrade was done almost 50 years back. So what we see is that people are looking to, on existing hospital, they are looking how to, improve the outcome with this new technology and other. And for the new hospital, already there is a lot of emphasis on the concept called a smart hospital, where there is a lot of technology is involved. So I see there are 3 or 4 areas where we think that this will going to actually explode. One is medical education, especially the enhancement of a skill set of existing staff, because the things are moving so rapidly that across, and I'm talking about not just the Middle East, I'm talking about Middle East and Africa, that there are doctors sitting in remote villages and nurses are there, and they can't go travel somewhere to enhance their skill set. But if they don't enhance it, they will be left behind. So I think one is where we are looking at, where we see the demand is already people are asking us to consider when we are either restructuring the existing healthcare facilities or created a new facilities is relating to medical education. Second, unfortunately, in the region is one of the highest lifestyle diseases in the world. Unfortunately, some of the countries rank in top 10, whether it's diabetes, hypertension, and other. That require continuous monitoring. And that is again where we see this going to really help. And because those monitoring can save life, can save money, and doctor, you don't need to visit doctor every week or something like that. The third thing where we see is diagnostic. Again, we are start working a lot in Africa also. There are very far-fetched places where the people can collect the samples, do some even some places MRIs and other things are not there. But who going to diagnose what is the problem, actual problem is? So I think again that's the thing is where we think it will be very helpful, and again people are looking for that. And again, I think the last point which I wanted to highlight is because countries like Saudi, Egypt, and a lot of other African countries, you have 1 or 2 central cities, and there's a lot of smaller towns and other things. And everybody is basically making a hub and a spoke model where you have a lot of clinics and diagnostic center linked to a main hospital. And you can't just carry the, basically the patient information and test results and everything from one place to another. So we think that these are 4 or 5 areas. Not we think, this is where we are already being asked by our clients, investor, operator, to look at how we implement that. It's not just the cost saving. It is just to do the right diagnostic, which can save a life. Because if you don't do a right diagnostic, and it can be too late by the time the right diagnostic is done. So we think that as long as I repeat that Christina said, confidentiality and regulatory issues are there, I don't use that word, but I will use it, that is going to explode in the region.
So yeah, really useful to understand that. So key elements you're talking about there in terms of medical education, in terms of non-communicable diseases, which has been a problem in the region for a long time now, and then the kind of diagnostics element that you mentioned and remote monitoring. One area that I think you talk about areas that are exploding, areas that are becoming more and more prevalent as issues in the Middle East. One, of course, is mental health, and I want to bring Phil in on this. So Phil, ADHD 360, so you're obviously right at the kind of forefront of one particularly concerning area of mental health. It was also your first trip to the region, your first Arab Health. What did you see as the kind of desire and the appetite for mental health development in the Middle East?
Thanks, Steve. I think one of the reinforcing facts that we found was the region's appetite for change in relation to mental health, whether that's a post-pandemic or what other drivers, but that there was a tremendous appetite for embracing mental health, which was one of the main reasons we went, was to test that appetite and see what traction was available. And of course, what we can't afford to do, and I'm excited by these conversations so far today as well, we can't afford to see mental health in isolation. Mental health links to physical health incredibly. And if we think about my particular world of attention deficit, linking that into diabetes, relationship with food, emotional regulation, into physical harm, and so on and so on. The region is absolutely set for an amazing change right now, and that's really exciting. And if we blend over that the opportunity for data and big data to come from technology, where the region can perhaps blaze a trail, because we're starting almost from a blank sheet of paper. We can actually look to see what can we implement in a new way in a region that's relatively fresh to this market, as opposed to having to change things. And I got Daniel really excited me there with some of the stuff that was being talked about in terms of FDA approved wearables, because what we've got across the world is a heck of a lot of quackery coming out of this does that, this does the other. When you start to get approval for devices, then you get data coming out of those devices that can be then used when you've got a blank sheet of paper and a new platform. I think the world starts to get really exciting. It is really interesting to listen to Christina in terms of that legal framework. Of course, that's a challenge. And then Daniel challenges that with the great expression of die with your privacy intact. And, wow, did that wake me up in terms of how can we get patients to actually consider the relevance of releasing their data to healthcare providers in terms of that context. So Arab Health gave me as a supplier of services confirmation that we are on the right track. Healthcare World itself as an organization introduced me to a whole new network of individuals, which it's reinforcing today. But more importantly for me, I think that the biggest driver is to not seek to take a service into a new territory just to expand and help that territory. It's actually to take it into a new territory and actually provide something in a way that's never been done before. Imagine for my market, being able to track mood, being able to say to the individual patient through the use of technology and data, this is now telling us that your mood has changed. Why is that? You need to get a grip of this. You now need to change something. Your BP has just gone up. Why? You've taken your medication. Your BP is still rising. Your mood is changing. And we already do this in a kind of analog digital platform using apps. But I still see that as an analog world because the data is coming out of it in very much an analog usage. We track women in the menstrual cycle to change their medication when it's appropriate, but we have to have the woman physically input that data. Imagine if we can actually take that data automatically from a female patient that says, this is the week of your month when we need to change your medication for your ADHD, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to carry on tracking that. And within big data fields, we can then check the provenance of those decisions that clinicians are making. I get really excited, and I think the Middle East provides an opportunity to not have to change something from an old way of doing things into it, and we get the opportunity to go fresh. And I hear what Christina said about our response to credit cards when they first came. And I remember even within my ADHD work lifespan, the response to chip and pin and those kind of things. We are on the edge of a digital future. I think to take Daniel's final point, if I can rabbiting on, the final point to actually bring into Daniel's world is we've got to make sure that these wearables, these data providers, however they look, become affordable as an option against the analog opportunity. And unless they become affordable, the analog world will win over, because the argument of the bigger safety issue will not win over today's budget. And I think that's the next challenge. And it may be the Middle East that breaks that barrier down with volumetrics.
There were some really, really interesting points, Phil, and a fantastic contribution. And a few things I want to riff off in what you've just said there. Ross, I want to come to you on this because you've been 12 Arab Healths, yeah? One of the things that Phil talked about there, and that I've certainly experienced over the course of my 12 Arab Healths, is that openness to and desire to see innovation in the region. How much have you seen that over the 12 years you've been doing this? How much change have you already seen in the health systems of the Middle East, and what do you expect to see in the future?
Yeah, there's huge change. Even in the exhibitors, what they display. I may have said this in our last call, but it used to be all about, here's a massive piece of machinery. Look at this, guys. Isn't it amazing? But now the exhibitors are also talking about the software and the interoperability and everything that talks as part of that machine or part of the equipment that goes into the hospital. The Intelligent Health Pavilion, I'm sorry for going on about it, but there was a lot in there about the equipment talking to each other and monitoring the patient and everything else. You now have heads of innovation, within the various authorities. That didn't exist when I first came out here. The way that the authorities are splitting themselves into kind of the regulation side and then the hospital management side, then they're being able to push a lot more into innovation and working with PPPs and developing those kind of relationships with partners and companies that they may not have worked with previously. It's not all about working just with a healthcare or a medical manufacturer, whatever it is. Companies like Microsoft and Amazon, who exhibited at Arab Health for the first time this year, they bought, I think, 5 or 6 different, essentially healthcare IT partners from the US. And we didn't used to get that at Arab Health. I think we used to have Cerner years ago, and that was pretty much it when I came. And now we're seeing more and more of those companies that want to participate. They see that the Middle East, Dubai, the UAE is it's a region where this kind of stuff is being implemented. It's happening, so, and there's a lot of opportunity here. So this is why I'm expecting this to continue growing over the next couple of years. We're investing more and more of our time and our effort into this innovative technology, into startups, into product demos from companies on the show floor. So it's really cool. It's really interesting for us, and it's something where we can again differentiate ourselves from a usual trade show. We want to be ahead of the curve as much as possible, and being able to have Daniel present around the metaverse and the future of healthcare at the healthcare the Future Health Summit, those kind of things is what we want to do more of at at Arab Health, instead of being a kind of reactionary show where, okay, we'll just get all of these companies in to talk about what they're doing. But we want to be able to show that this is what the UAE and the Middle East is doing. Because we are a global platform, and us as Informa or as Arab Health, we facilitate the conversations. That's kind of all we do, but we want to make sure that what is happening, and we are influencing, I guess, to an extent, what is happening in the healthcare sector in the Middle East. And we know that this is a vital part of it already, and will be even more over the next few years.
I think one of the interesting things for me about working in Middle East healthcare systems, where you've got quite, I won't say young systems, but developing systems that are moving forward rapidly and have a lot of ambition. Sitting here in the UK, we've got the world's oldest free at the point of delivery health system. We've got a 75-year-old health system, and in some ways it's creaking a little bit. How do you innovate in something that's kind of been there and been doing the same thing forever? I think one of the ways that we do that, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, Professor Jed Byrne, who's sort of international director with NHS England, and one of the things that we were talking about during Arab Health, and in terms of our experience, was actually how much, not just what the NHS as a mature health system can teach to these these developing health systems, but also what it can learn. Because the fact of the matter is that when you sit in an innovative developing health system that's moving forward rapidly, you're seeing that health system drawing best practice examples from all over the world, having the flexibility and I guess the green fields to be able to draw in new ideas and new ways of doing things, and seeing things with a fresh eye that perhaps you don't see in more mature health systems. Then being able to take some of those ideas that are coming out of these developing systems and bring them back into a mature system like the UK one. I want to pick up on another point though that Phil made. Daniel, to you. Phil used a wonderful word during his little contribution there. Quackery. How do we in the metaverse, in the Internet of Medical Things, in the healthiverse, the great phrases that you come out, how do we avoid quackery? How do we make sure that we're actually picking the right apps and solutions and letting the ones that maybe are a little bit quackish fall to one side?
Well, I think medical history is rife with examples of, snake oil salesmen, and that can move to the digital world as well. Take this crystal or look into this light and it's going to change your physiology. I think the key thing is now to get more evidence. Now in the digital world, you don't need to do a 10-year double-blind placebo-controlled trial. You can crowdsource it, get 1,000 individuals that match your particular disease phenotype and have them run a clinical study, or do that with your existing wearables or beyond. So I think it's now about developing better standards and guidelines around what is good evidence. And for example, on the digital.health website, we have a section on evidence for most companies that provide it. If you're claiming that this wearable or patch can do blood pressure, does it match up against the gold standard? And now we are seeing the regulatory bodies, approve a whole set of digital therapeutics and AI-based algorithms. So that's one set of standards to avoid the quackery. And then the challenge often is implementation. There's in Germany, for example, there's a platform called DIGA, where they now are paying for and integrating into the workflow digital therapeutics, but they're not often being used because often the clinicians might not be educated about it, or don't. It's not the way they've been trained. So that's not exactly quackery, but it's about educating and matching the right solution at the right time. So instead of just thinking, I'm going to prescribe an ADHD drug to that patient, I might prescribe them the Achilles FDA cleared app, which is a video game for kids to play that seems to do as well or better than Ritalin. But they need to get experience prescribing that and having it paid for as well, and being rewarded for their time as a clinician integrating that. So evidence and being clear about outcomes.
Christina, you wanted to comment on this one?
Yeah, just a quick one. As Daniel said, we do see this actually coming into the regulations. We see it globally, and we see even industry-specific organizations trying to create standards to even assist the regulators, but regionally specific. I mentioned that SFDA, AI, and machine learning and medical devices regulation. And written into there is the need to provide clinical evidence of the device's effectiveness and performance before it can be placed on the market, and also clinical validation to measure the ability of the device to yield an actual clinical meaningful outcome associated with its intended use. So it's not just tech for tech, right? You're not just creating more burdens and new processes just because they're fun and interesting, but are they actually meaningful? Are they actually producing something for the patient and for the improvement of the healthcare system? And we are seeing those sort of concepts being written into the local regulations here, which is quite nice to see. But hopefully they don't go too far as being overburdensome and actually slowing down then the ability for innovation. I mean, this is the double-edged sword, right? Do you want the regulations to consider these to make sure that it's not quackery, but at the same time, does that create an overburdensome system that is too long to get it to the market? By the time you get approved, you're still trying to approve use of the credit card rather than the latest technology.
And I think I had conversations during Arab Health with both the Ministry of Health and Protection for the UAE and with the Dubai Health Authority about how they are thinking about, or the fact that they're thinking about how they regulate medical apps and medical as medical devices or as pieces of software. Is that a conversation that Al-Tamimi have been involved in? Have you got any idea how and where that's going to go?
Well, that's always what can we talk about publicly? But yes, you're right. These conversations, I've been with Tamimi and the region for 8 years now. And as was alluded to earlier, we even see the regulators are also on boards and on committees for industry-specific organizations. So they're playing dual roles, not only being the regulator within their government network, but being part of the conversation and pushing the needle forward, being part of the collaboration across the region and across the world. So yes, we do know that the laws and regulations, we are talking with them about re-examining them, looking at them, especially in Saudi here. UAE has pretty advanced for the region telehealth regulations, their ICT and health law at the regional level, their data protection and privacy, personal data protection and privacy laws. Saudi's still rewriting all that, but what we're seeing is that they're not at this point just trying to tweak it and still stick with an old system that they're just trying to keep fixing. They are very happy to erase all of that and put in something new. And so this is a process that will take some time, not an overnight solution, but the focus with any new law or regulation is it adaptable to innovation that we can't even foresee right now, and trying to kind of stress test it from that perspective, and at least make it very broad at the level of the law, so at least the regulations can be more adaptive, because right now we have laws that are too rigid. It doesn't matter what the regulators want to do, they're stuck because the law is very rigid in the confines of it. We have the government started a virtual hospital here in Saudi. There's no regulatory environment for that because we're so stuck on the physical. So we will see rewriting of these laws to create much more broad frameworks, principle level laws, that then the regulators can be more flexible in the future, but it will take some time.
Well, Lee, I want to come to you. Another point that Phil raised, which I thought was really interesting, and I wonder kind of if you can comment on how humour would potentially fit into this and how you kind of see this developing. Phil talked about the idea, and I think it's fascinating coming at it as Phil does from a mental health perspective, but the idea that interoperability between systems and interoperability between apps and solutions actually creates a situation where you start to see a whole patient and you're able to diagnose across lots of different disease pathways and areas. Phil used the example of diabetes, diet affecting mental health. How do you create that kind of matrix of solutions that allows you to look at all the different elements of a patient's healthcare?
Well, what we do is basically, at this stage in time, and what we're offering in the region is a platform that connects the patients to the clinicians, and we try very simply to digitize a clinical pathway. in order for the clinician to be able to collect data in a continuous or scheduled manner from the patient wherever he is, analyze the data and show it, visualize it at the level of the clinician in a way that would help him action this data. And we have been very careful in, how to use this data collection and, analysis and visualization, because our software as a medical device is regulated and it is a class 1, so low risk kind of a regulated device at this stage. So our ability or our mandate is just to channel information from one party to the other, but without, actioning ourselves the data. And we have recently applied to become a class 2B medical device. And as soon as this is out and we are certified as a class 2B medical device, we would be able to introduce more AI into, the analysis and the visualization of the data, the ability to personalize pathways or thresholds or actions based on patients, which we cannot do right now as a class 1 device, help in the diagnosis, provide decision support systems to the doctors. So hopefully this is coming and we would be able to, become much more involved in the decision support process between the patient and the doctor. Now, what we put on our platform is basically, the clinical pathway, and it could be for ADHD, if there is a clinical pathway that the patient needs to follow, or diabetes, if it's a diabetic patient, or if there is comorbidity, to combine them in one clinical pathway that is adapted to a patient that has both. And this is where, the evolution is taking us. But this is a work that is done not as a product or as a tool, but a product that is designed with the clinician so that it serves the purpose of the patient and the clinician. And I think this context is important, rather than talking about, how well advanced these tools are on their own, but how they fit into the context of the healthcare system and, the ecosystem of the patient, the healthcare facility, and the clinician.
I think that's the point, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at your system in particular, you've got a situation where quite often conversations that we've had are around individual disease pathways and creating solutions around individual disease pathways. But the future, and what Daniel is talking about, is moving to a situation where you have not just multiple disease pathways, but all the disease pathways within one individual app piece of technology, because that way then you end up with that utopia that Phil talked about, where you're actually linking the different disease areas, the different physiological markers of the patient, and you're able to kind of, not just create interoperable technology, but interoperable healthcare, where you're able to treat a multitude of and diagnose a multitude of conditions at the same time. Daniel, am I talking rubbish, or is this where we're trying to end up?
No, I think historically we define diseases in buckets: ADHD, autism, diabetes, when in reality they're very heterogeneous and often sometimes misdiagnosed. Or in this new genomic metaverse age, there's you can crowdsource the genetics of diabetes patients and see that there's at least 3 distinct subtypes, all who respond differently to different forms of medication, diet, nutrition, prevention, etc. So I think there's opportunity now to redefine things at a much more interesting, often genetic and molecular level, design the digital and metaverse interventions that will both be most applicable, and to continue to learn and redefine both prevention, diagnostics, and therapy. And again, I imagine building this sort of metaverse, always updated mind map that's going to be enabling the patient to know patients like me or patients like mine, in a real-time manner that's not lagging by months or years. So a real opportunity to converge.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. What I'd like to do is just go around each of our panelists, and just for one quick point, it's going to be 12 months now, well, 11 months until we're all back in Dubai for Arab Health again next year. What's the one thing that each of you think that we're going to be talking about in 12 months' time? What's the one thing that's going to be going on in that Middle East region that we're going to be talking about at the next Arab Health? Mansour, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I think it is more of the focus will be precision medicine. And that would, I think, is now becoming with all this advancement in technology and other, and with better diagnostic, I think next year, precision medicine for me will be one of the key topic in the region.
And of course, the Emirate Genome Programme is ongoing. That's starting to come together. That will start to fuel where we go in terms of that precision medicine piece. Christina, what do you think? What's the thing we're going to be talking about next year?
Oh, that's a tough one. As you mentioned, the Genome Project is a big one in different jurisdictions in the region. Also, we're just seeing the countries trying to figure out more and more how to utilize the data. So we've got all this data coming in, and then what to do with it. And we're already starting to see questions around data monetization. So if you are either the government or a big healthcare institution, and you're providing services potentially to get them to be low cost, you might be providing them to the patient for free, but then look at monetizing the data and how does that work from a legal and regulatory perspective. I think that's a topic that will come across more and more over the next year and beyond. But I would yield the rest of my time to Daniel. I'd be quite interested to hear what his future predictions are.
Well, you'll be surprised to know that he's coming last. So you get
okay.
Phil, I mean, surely next year we're going to be talking about mental health and ADHD, aren't we?
I'd love us to be. Whether or not we'll get that much traction in 12 months, time will tell. But I certainly think mental health and its connectivity to physical health is an agenda we can use the next 12 months prior to Arab Health to actually start to promote across the region, to bring that agenda into such a great conference and an event platform. And I think when we can stop seeing things in silos and we start to see things around that whole interoperability around the individual patient, to use some of your words earlier, Steve, that to me gets really exciting instead of having stovepiped healthcare. So for me, if we start to bring that agenda into the region, I would hope to see that agenda in the region when everybody gets together again.
Well, certainly one thing that we do know is that the Dubai Health Authority are putting together an RFP for mental health facilities in Dubai. So there will certainly be some developments around mental health in the next 12 months. Waleed, from your point of view, what are we going to be talking about in a year's time?
Well, I'm gonna move away from pure technology and say probably that I would love to be able to hear how we're going to pay for all of this. From a payer point of view, it's really difficult for them to understand the value, because they think on a short-term basis. We know that the region is full of expats that are on private medical insurance policies that last for 12 months. So this is an area that needs to be put back on the table. I mean, there are certain discussions about value-based care and stuff like that, but I don't think it's really very serious yet. And I hope that in 12 months we will be have a glimmer of, a step forward.
It's a good point that you raised. And actually, in an hour and a half webinar, we haven't really talked about payer models and how all of this is going to be paid for at all. And I think in the region, particularly, a couple of big developments, of course, in terms of Saudi and the creation of what is essentially a brand new public health system. That's still very much in development. There'll be a lot of talk about that. And I think we've got some webinars coming up in May on Saudi and the development of Saudi. And of course, in the UAE, the same thing. We've also got a new public provider in the Dubai Connect Health Corporation. So there's a couple of new public providers on the block, and they will be undoubtedly looking at how they create their health systems and their payer models. Ross, in 12 months, you'll have done your 13th Arab Health.
Yeah, I'll probably look even older and more tired than I do now.
You look a hell of a lot better than I do. At least you've still got hair. So what are we going to be talking about at Arab Health next year?
Well, I have to defer to the experts a little bit on this subject, but I'm really hoping that we can start to see what Daniel, Phil, and Waleed have discussed around what they do, and start seeing the next stages of that, seeing that as involving that more in the exhibition, these products, these technologies, seeing more of that development over time. And for me personally, just having another excellent year and you know, bringing everyone back together for an even bigger Arab Health. But you know, there's been some amazing topics here, and I'm looking to read up a lot more stuff about what's going on and how we can implement that at the show.
And last word to you, Daniel. 12 months time, how much further are we going to have pushed this whole concept?
Well, I think I mentioned Moore's law. There's also this one called Amara's law, that we tend to overestimate what can happen in a couple of years and underestimate what can happen in a decade, and that's even getting compressed. I think, you know, we're only 3 or 4 months into this whole ChatGPT explosion, and I think it's going to be quite disruptive across many fields and really shift how we can provide care in the Arab region and around the planet. And I think, you know, it's only getting faster, and so we're going to see a lot of surprises about how it changes the role of the clinician and how we do diagnostics and how we integrate our electronic medical record systems, and how a lot of the many of the companies that are displayed, they're going to plug into it in some form, hopefully be contributing data that then can be integrated in at the point of care, at the website, the bedside, or by the empowered patient. So I think that we'll see kind of that to be, I think it's a bit of a frame shift, just like the Gutenberg Bible, and then when we saw the internet come out in the 80s, 90s, I think it's almost that transformative. And so I think that'll be an interstitial thematic at the show next year in some form. So I would look for that, and then and later on top of that, the ability to take data and make it insights and knowledge in a faster format.
Thanks very much, Daniel, and thanks to everybody. That's all we've got time for this morning. Really fantastic session. Just remains to thank Phil Anderton, Waleed Hassalou, Christina Sahatsky, Ross, as always from Arab Health, Mansour Ahmed from Colliers, and of course the brilliant Dr. Daniel Kraft. Thank you for staying up late to talk to us and speaking to us through a horrible cold. My name's
It's now tomorrow for me. I've reached tomorrow.
You're on the same day as the rest of us. Tremendous. My name's Steve Gardner. This has been the Healthcare World Series. It will be available to watch back on YouTube and on our website. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to my panel, and have a great day. Thanks very much. Goodbye.